Yeah, so I know we we have like usually like this whole thing where we like so I know I'm like the leftover remnant from like the original like Impact and Coffee team, but I'm Robert Nelson. I've been with Impact and Coffee for a very long time now. But we have a new team of folks um, and Jermaine and Denise, and I just want to say how much I appreciate both of them helping out with the coordinating and the planning and everything. And so, yeah, impacting coffee, has changed a little bit over the last few months. So, like, we took a survey a few months ago and decided that we would do impacting coffees not the first 3 Tuesdays, but the first and third Tuesdays of the month. So, getting it twice a month instead of 3 times out of a month. I think that just came out of some COVID responses. Some, folks just this is the time we live in now, and so we always start out with like a gratitude Tuesday. So I appreciate that folks would introduce themselves in the chat. But if there's anything that you're extraordinarily grateful for, please leave that in the chat this morning. I know I'm grateful for a lot, especially the moisture getting here in the desert. And we sorely need it, and so to see some rain and some thunderstorms like at our house downtown especially. So just a few announcements before we get started. So obviously we're here to honor New Mexico Leeway because they're one of our Next Gen In Award recipients, and so we're really glad to hear about the project that you talked about last summer. And then also we are looking for any volunteers that might want to join the Impact and Coffee team. And this is a really great team of folks, and we're just really looking forward to doing more of these in the future, and hopefully get some more people on board too. But Jermaine or Janice, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Excited to hear about your project.
Thanks, Denise. With that, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you, Michelle and Lauren, and we can go ahead and get started.
Sure. What I thought might be helpful would be for Lauren to say a couple words about, what the project was this summer and the work that she did with New Mexico Legal Aid. And then maybe I could go behind her and talk a little bit more generally about some of the programs that we've had with students. I believe this is now the second time that we've had a Next Gen In award, and it's very meaningful to our program. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and mute myself and hand it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Michelle.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Hightower. I'm 18. I am a student at UNM Gallup now. This past summer, I was interning at New Mexico Legal Aid. And so there we talked about at the beginning of the internship, we talked about a lot of the stuff that I would do, not only for New Mexico Legal Aid as an intern, but also for this Next Gen In project. And so at the beginning, maybe in like May, we talked about what I could do to connect GSAs or like students in this area to legal aid. And we decided that because I am a recent high school graduate, and that these high school students would see me more as a peer and maybe be less intimidated by me, that I could help bridge the gap between high school students and legal aid. The idea was that we would have these students, there are these students who are going through a transitional period in their lives. They're starting to see and experience maybe discrimination or different treatment because of how they identify and things like that. So they're experiencing these things, but they're not yet at this point where they know how to get help or know how to support themselves. And so an example of this, when I was in high school just last year, I had a lot of questions about whether I or my peers had legal protection for some of the things we were dealing with. I saw some of my peers who were trans who didn't really have a bathroom to go to, or their pronouns or name weren't being respected. We hear slurs in the halls all the time, in the classroom, and I'm wondering if someone should be doing something about that. And even smaller things like you weren't allowed to have a same-sex escort for homecoming or prom. Just all kinds of different things of different, maybe not important levels of importance, but just the impact they have on the students. And so I had a lot of questions about these things and whether they're big or small. I didn't know who to ask or who to go to or how to go about finding these things out. So the idea was that I was going to bridge the gap between students and professionals. So we emailed all the schools in McKinley County. I emailed all the schools in the McKinley County area. I gave them information about what we were doing. What we wanted to do was to offer conferences, like maybe one-on-one conferences with an attorney at New Mexico Legal Aid, or have presentations that explain certain things, or things like that, where we can meet with the students and they can ask whatever questions that they had, and they could find the help that they need. And then the attorney in New Mexico Legal Aid would help them, help them work the legal language and understand that these are things that they had protections for, or these are things that they could do to, kind of resolve these issues. Yeah, so I did email a lot of schools, and I think that because it was summer, I didn't get a lot of responses back, but I'm still hoping, even though I'm not an intern right now at New Mexico Legal Aid, I'm still hoping to, continue to reach out to them. And if they respond to me, that I would help connect the office with the schools.
I feel like Lauren is selling this slightly short, because the other big piece of her project was on connecting resources that are specific to those protections, like Title IX and some of the federal laws that apply to students, even if they're under the age of 18, to all kinds of different legal protections. She worked on creating a knowledge product that's going to survive long after her time with New Mexico Legal Aid is over. And I did want to mention that her project is really a continuation of the first grant that we received from Impact and Coffee with a previous student, a couple summers ago, pre-COVID. What we have seen happen at New Mexico Legal Aid is that our standalone LGBTQ plus project was originally conceived as primarily helping adults who were experiencing discrimination with housing or in the workplace, or in interacting with officials, maybe in a medical setting or in a law enforcement setting. And what we have found is that because there are so many young people who identify as gender nonconforming or queer in some way, that really schools are ground zero of where issues like public accommodations, discrimination, all of the issues that Lauren just mentioned come to the forefront. And so having students like Lauren who are able to talk in that peer-to-peer way, to reach out to schools, and we did focus on McKinley County for this particular project, is really invaluable, because there is, I think, a pretty big cultural difference in how students today in 2022 are being treated by their schools and treated by their peers than even 5 years ago. And it's a rapidly evolving site for us to think about providing legal services. It's also very non-traditional, because even has historically been very much involved in community outreach that often has not included incidences related to juvenile law or for people under the age of 18. So I would say for New Mexico, this is actually a very innovative way to think about providing services, location of services, and how we conduct that outreach through the peer-to-peer kind of connection that Lauren was able to provide. On behalf of New Mexico Legal Aid, I definitely wanted to thank the Impact and Coffee Group, because I feel like this has allowed us to both provide support to the students who were interested in doing this type of work, and also expand on the work that we began with the attorney side through the summers. So we're very grateful for the city of Albuquerque considering us for a project the second time around, and of course we're very pleased to have Lauren join us over the summer. Happy to answer any questions about the project or about the law firm in general. And again, we're just very thankful to be here, and we appreciate you, Robert, for kind of putting first and foremost the thankfulness that we have around the project.
Absolutely. I do have a question, and this is probably a more broader question. I think I know, and in a separate circle, I'm doing some housing policy work. But you talk a little bit more about like the just tremendous lack of housing for LGBTQ folks, for youth especially. Like, you don't have to chime, like you don't have to give us like all the nitty-gritty details, but like could you just talk a little bit about that lack of access point for a lot of folks and what that means? Because I don't think a lot of folks in the audience, or even just myself, just knows like all the ins and outs of that detail.
Sure. So this topic is actually of huge general interest. I would say that, just to pull out one little thread or two little threads here, last October, myself and Adrian Lawyer from the Transgender Resource Center were actually invited by the State Bar of New Mexico to give an in-depth presentation for a couple of hours on this exact topic. That was partially because the most recent data that we have for states like New Mexico and also nationally shows pretty conclusively that really for anyone that's gender nonconforming or identifies somewhere on the LGBTQ plus spectrum of identities, that housing and discrimination related to housing are one of the key issues that, if it is not resolved, just result in someone's life really going off a cliff, for lack of a better term. Not having stable housing interacts with so many other facets of modern life that it's very difficult, even if you have scaffolded around other resources like legal services or like medical help, for someone to climb out of the difficulty that being unhoused or even long-term homeless can cause. And statistically, it's always been one of the top 3 issues that individuals self-report as a problem, meaning that when you ask people, what are the kind of things that you might need help with or that are causing difficulties in your life, people consistently say housing, alongside often discrimination issues, things that happen in workplace and public accommodation settings. And so at New Mexico Legal Aid, what we have been doing specifically here in New Mexico is really related to eviction defense. So when COVID hit, I would say that before that, the remnants of 2008 and 2009 had really been that when we thought about housing, it was from an eviction prevention standpoint, but it was focused on foreclosures for people who had bad mortgages or were underwater on their liens. And then with the onset of COVID and the way that the state and federal government responded with eviction moratoriums, we knew very early on, and I think most places did nationally, that when those moratoriums expired, what would happen to rural states like New Mexico and states that historically had very high rates of poverty is that people had lost work during COVID, maybe had gotten behind on their rent, and this eviction moratorium, once it expired, was going to mean that a lot of evictions were going to be processed in a very short period of time. And there was almost going to be this second wave related to debt collection. And debt collection has already been a problem for individuals who are LGBTQ plus identified, because so many of our population, we change our names. You might have somebody who, has gone through a name change process, is already in the process of maybe not having the family support or access to generational wealth that other Americans enjoy. And so we knew that this debt collection problem was going to hit the LGBTQ plus community harder. And that's exactly what we're seeing with our stats for this year, for 2022. I know that this is maybe longer than you wanted to know, so I'll just close on this one little point, which is that historically our project, which has a team of 3, has done about 100 cases a year. And by the time June 1st hit for 2022 this year, we'd already handled 85 really complicated interjurisdictional problems, mostly related to people that had come to New Mexico from other jurisdictions. Because while everything was happening with housing, the other big problem that's been looming in New Mexico is that people are fleeing, particularly with young folks, places like Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Florida, coming to New Mexico because they see us as almost like this safe haven, but we don't have enough affordable housing. The schools, as Lauren mentioned, are not always the most welcoming, and even with some strong protections on the books, it takes attorneys often, suing or threatening to sue or enforcing those rights through administrative hearings for those good rules to be upheld on the books. And there's not enough of us to go around. So I would say it remains a very ongoing, persistent problem in New Mexico.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate you. Lauren, is there anything you want to add to that? And after that, I think we can open up for more questions too.
I think maybe the only thing I want to add to that is to kind of highlight or to say again that there is a lot of there's a lot of discrimination in school, I think, or discrimination, there's a lot of mistreatment in school. Just from my experience, I am not obviously a queer, I'm not it is hard to be a queer person in Gallup, New Mexico, at least, or New Mexico, when there is so little education about it. We don't learn in school, we don't learn in class how to treat these people, how to treat, I'm sorry, I am saying this not the way I want to say it. There's just so little education about queer people in school, especially in New Mexico. And there is this kind of culture because of how there's this culture that, we are different or wrong or bad. We shouldn't be like this still. And there's a lot of treatment from staff and students that is negative and shouldn't happen because of this. And I think, I don't know, I just wanted to kind of I don't know, restate that. I think that's an important issue that we have.
Absolutely. And yeah, I agree. It is still a widespread issue to this day. And I think the more and more that people know, well, the more and more people know, hopefully, yeah, it's 2022 and we're still dealing with this kind of stuff. So yeah, here we are. Um, yeah. So I really appreciate you lifting that back up. And, I think it's up to all of us to make sure that's lifted up as much as we can. I just wanna, open it up for any questions from the audience. I know Denise or Jermaine or Kara or Diane. Diane, yeah, yes, Diana. Sorry. Or Trish. Welcome, Trish.
Hi, everyone. This is Diane over at Catholic Charities. I just want to say thank you to both of you for bringing that area of your service to light. And having in the past had to do outreach to schools, at that time, it's hard to believe, but putting defibrillators in schools and CPR in schools was considered a hot topic in its time. And believe it or not, there was a lot of adversity against such an obvious thing, right? So here we are all these years later, and this is the area that we're addressing. And one of the things we found is that reaching out to organized groups like school nurses is where you may find advocates. There are school nurse associations, and trying to get in front of them as this being a mental health issue, because quite often they may be the first people who come in contact with kids who are struggling, and being subjected to all of that. And usually it's finding either a parent advocate or a staff advocate to kind of maneuver the administrative level of schools. And having just moved here from Texas, where they're trying to not let you learn anything about anything. I can see the challenges you face, but I think maneuvering through those groups is an easier approach, because you're working within the system versus coming in from the outside. That's what we kind of learned in our experience. And, there were times where the most obvious people you thought would support certain things didn't. So don't be discouraged, but just keep chipping away at it, because there are other ways to reach students beyond the classroom. And so I think you're on the right path with getting that information out. And Lauren, kudos to you. Great job.
Thank you so much. I should have mentioned, I neglected to, that when we began talking to schools all over New Mexico and then did kind of this honing in for McKinley County as a very rural location in New Mexico, that one of our earliest advocates that has kind of remained this way are the Mckinney-Vento programs that exist in schools that are really set up to help students that are either in unstable housing, at risk of becoming unhoused, or may already be homeless. And they're very used to kind of being that connection point, just like the school nurse program that you were talking to. And so I'm making a note here that we need to reach back out to nurses this semester, because you're right, there are a variety of programs that take place in schools, and some of them are not in the classroom, but are still really connected to community problems. And so thank you for mentioning it. And yes, I think that working at all levels in the schools is really going to be the key to long-term success.
I'd like to add that I really appreciate that you brought that up. It's one of the biggest advocates that I had at my school was a counselor. Her name was Sahara Butler. She was the one that got me in contact with New Mexico Legal Aid. She worked with me. She was the sponsor for the GSA at our school, and she was great. She was a counselor, so she worked a lot with students. Mainly with their, there's classes, their scheduling, but also a lot with their at-home life and getting them any additional help that they may need for mental health or just any support they need. So yeah, I think it's really great that you mentioned to not be discouraged, because there are ways to get help in schools that, yes, are in the classroom.
I'm also going to put my contact information in the chat. If there's anybody who wants to connect after today's meeting, or has other questions or other things that we might be able to collaborate on, by all means, please reach out. And of course, happy to answer any other questions that might come up this morning.
I'm just making sure I check the chat for any questions. I don't see any, but I do see like Kara and Trish sent some nice notes. Thank you both for doing that. Appreciate you. Jermaine or Denise, do you have any other questions for Lauren or Michelle?
No questions, just thank you for your presentation.
Absolutely. I guess my other question too is, and you may have already answered this, but this will probably dovetail into our last question, which is, what can we do to support you all today? But like, what are some ways in which we can build more capacity for this work to happen? Because it's so necessary.
I mean, it is tremendous that y'all have been able to support students in the summer. This has made a huge difference to our law firm. We're at a moment where I think that some states and some firms and some programs are really investing in, the future of justice advocacy. And others, I think, are still very tied into a much more conservative model that says, people have to go to college and go to law school and then come back and work in the communities that they're from to do justice work. And we're trying to do something a little bit different at New Mexico Legal Aid. And so I would say the part that maybe we're most interested in is how we can do that work collaboratively with other young folks, because our concept is basically that justice affects everybody, and therefore injustice also affects everybody in the community. And if we wait for everybody to go through, 5 or more years of schooling, the chance that we have to work on really pressing and current issues may just pass us by. Things might get worse. They take longer to undo. And so whatever opportunities that y'all might be able to connect us with to do this work that we think is really urgent and is really timely, and doesn't necessarily require that somebody go through the formal schooling, kind of the more traditional Western education to get the credentialing, we think that's really important. And it's a pivot for us as a law firm too, because we've always operated in kind of that older model that was very attorney centric. We thought about justice as something that only happened in courthouses. And now we're thinking about community justice in a much broader spectrum. And so, it's definitely an evolution. I'm not saying we're getting everything perfect or right, but I think that what we are attempting to do is think about the problems from the lens of who they affect the most and how we can get people off the bench and into the game working on those problems.
Thanks, Michelle. That's so critical, and I appreciate the distinction between like what happens in the courtroom and community justice. I think that's how communities felt for a very long time, especially. Lauren, is there anything you want to add to that?
I don't have anything to add to that. I think that was very well said.
Awesome. Well, I guess so we always in Impact and Coffee, or at least our time with folks on Impact and Coffee with this last question, which is, and Michelle, you've probably already touched on this a little bit. So what can our community do for you today?
So a couple things. I think that spreading out the information, one, that we're here, that we want to help, is important, because maybe something I neglected to mention earlier is that pre-COVID, our capacity as a law firm, we had around 80, 85 employees, that were full-time working on justice issues, and many of them in the courtroom. We're now up to about 120 post-COVID, and we've added almost all of those advocates in the area of housing. For us, we see this as one of those timely issues that's affecting New Mexico, where we have this critical window to maybe intervene, prevent evictions, get people into more stable housing. And then I would say the way that this connects to kind of the rural work and LGBTQ plus issues is that while we've had other problems brewing during COVID, a lot of these underlying systems related to discrimination that affect young people, that affect health and mental health, like we were talking about today, those didn't go away. And so what we're now seeing come out of particularly school settings is that it's almost like the last 2 years have led to this little buildup of problems. And now we are seeing people with really significant, complicated legal issues that are coming to us for help. So I would encourage people, like I mentioned earlier, if there is a way to connect us with kind of that urgent contemporary work that's happening in communities, we're very interested. I think number two, we're also looking definitely at opportunities where people don't have to go through the entire formal process of maybe becoming an attorney advocate before they get involved. And then number three, I would say that, where there might be issues that we haven't heard about, we want to definitely know. And where there might be a space for y'all to use the various platforms that are represented in this group, to either hook us in or figure out a way for us all to collaborate, we think that's really important because there are a limited number of us. The American Bar Association calls New Mexico a legal desert because there's so few advocates doing work on the ground. And I know that's true for a lot of areas, not just law. But I do think that when it comes to these really critical systemic problems, sometimes it's hard to look at a really big solution that does not involve a justice component. And so we want to be part of those conversations. And if there's, a way to hook us in, to connect, to loop on that, like I would love to at least start the conversation, not promising results, but we definitely want to try and figure out where we can be helpful, where the best way is to deploy our limited resources, and also where we have the opportunity to uplift justice work that is not necessarily, waiting for what would happen in a courtroom or for people to finish a credential, things like that. Because sometimes the justice that you get from a courthouse is frankly too far off in the future to be much help to people.
Thanks, Michelle. Lauren, is there anything you want to close out with?
I think, again, I'd like to emphasize something that Michelle said earlier, something that would be really beneficial would be to increase and spread awareness about New Mexico Legal Aid and Next Gen In and what these organizations do. I think that last year when I started learning about these things and I first got in contact with New Mexico Legal Aid, it kind of opened my eyes to this. I had no idea about the legal system or work with the law just last year. And now that I have been in touch with them and I can see some of the stuff that they do, it has what I'm trying to say. Okay, sorry, my dogs are barking. What I'm trying to say is that they're being aware of what these organizations do and how they can help is super, super important and super beneficial. And I think that would help maybe alleviate some of that anxiety for like reaching out and getting help for yourself. Does that make sense? That makes sense.
You got it. You got this. Appreciate you. I did see Juan. Good to see you, Juan. Link in the chat. So I think that's a really good connection there. I'm sure you already know about New Mexico Access to the Justice Commission. But Michelle, there's something you mentioned too about New Mexico being a legal desert. Love to talk to you about that and how to build capacity around that at one point. I know from another group that I work with called the Renters Coalition, like that's what we were running into a lot of the time with folks. Like we could not provide the kind of legal expertise as non-lawyer people in terms of like navigating through the legal system before eviction or even at the moment of eviction. So I know that you all have been doing work. I know Serge has been doing work. So I'd love to have more conversations about that with you at one point. So that's it for this conversation this week. Just want to say Impacting Coffee will be back in a couple weeks. I believe that's October, October 18th, I believe. So I can't believe it's October. I can't believe we're 3/4 of the way done with this year and 2022 is almost over. But yeah, we'll make this video available for folks, for you, Michelle, and for you, Lauren, just so you can have it and spread to your networks. And we'll make sure to lift this up in our email newsletter as well, so folks have it as well. But also just want to say a big thank you to New Mexico Legal Aid and to you, Lauren, for the work you're doing and the work that needs to be done still. So it's such a critical thing to keep on going and know that this is a continuation of the work from our prior work too. So with that, I think we'll leave it at that and say have a really great week, everyone. May all your lights be green, and we will see you next time at Impact and Coffee. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. Good to see everybody.